From I Am Interchange, this is the Hatch podcast series. At the 2024 G20 Summit, the group of 20 heads of state and international governments that meet annually to address issues relating to global governance and economics. In Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, XPRIZE Rainforest announced Team Limelight as the grand prize winner of its $10 million incentive competition to better define and understand the intricate rainforest ecosystem. Team Limelight's project utilized drone-deployed multi-taxon monitoring sensors to survey 100 hectares of the rainforest within 24 hours and provide insights regarding those findings within a mere 48, exponentially increasing the advanced biodiversity monitoring possibilities across diverse landscapes and regions worldwide. With more than half of the planet's rainforests destroyed and approximately 20% of the Amazon lost, this innovative development, in addition to the handful more inspired and incentivized by the global 5-year competition, fosters much-needed hope, and none too soon. The innovations developed through XPRIZE Rainforest will revolutionize how we work together to protect the planet's most diverse and complex ecosystems in a time that has never been more urgent for life on Earth, says XPRIZE Executive Vice President of Biodiversity and Conservation, Peter Houlihan. I'm Tate Chamberlain, and in this first installment of a 2-part special Rio G20 series, I interview Peter Houlihan, a leader whose extensive on-the-ground research and multimedia approach to community engagement has established protections and fueled conservation efforts around the world for decades. Here, we discuss the importance of the rainforest ecosystem, humanity's future in the world weathered by its extractive ethos, and the collaborative efforts of XPRIZE participants that aren't just creating solutions to some of the world's most complex challenges, they're creating hope. Welcome everybody to the Hatch Podcast. We're in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil for the G20 Summit and the Rainforest XPRIZE at Casa G20. I'm Tate Chamberlain, and I'm with Peter Houlihan, the Executive Vice President, Biodiversity and Conservation at XPRIZE. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Peter, what's your relationship to the rainforest?
Oh man, as far back as I can remember in my life, I've always been captivated by the natural world and the life in the forest. And at a very young age, when I realized that tropical rainforests had the most species, the most animals, it was a place that just kind of captivated me, and I knew I had to go. And so from a very young age, maybe at 4 years old, I started plotting my own expeditions to rainforests to get out there. And it was maybe 10 years later when I finally made it. And it's just been a lifelong journey and connection to the rainforest.
In panning out, what is the world's relationship to them?
I mean, as humanity, the future of our existence depends on the stability of these ecosystems, which obviously since the middle of the last century has been in decline. We're now in a planetary crisis of biodiversity loss, and our survival is dependent upon protecting what we have on our home planet.
It's been described that the Amazon is reaching a tipping point. What does that mean?
So actually, a couple of our advisory board members on XPRIZE Rainforest, Dr. Carlos Nobre in particular, is a leading climate scientist in Brazil who really led a lot of the work describing these tipping points. And that was predicting that if we lost 20 to 25% of the Amazon rainforest, it would reach this point of no return where it starts to collapse and actually form into savanna. And the reason behind that is because the Amazon is so vast across South America that much of the water cycle and everything like that perpetuates itself. And so that whole ecological relationship across so vast an area in South America is actually collapsing. And so with a loss of 20 to 25%, we then lose that ability for the Amazon to sustain itself, and the ecosystem, the entire biome starts to change. Right now, we're just about at 20% of the Amazon having been lost. And so we are teetering on that tipping point. And a tipping point is really something that once you go past it, it's a point of no return. If the Amazon reaches that savanna transition, those areas will never naturally regenerate back to rainforest.
They'll never naturally regenerate, but if there's a project that...
There could be. I mean, there's a lot of restoration work that's really being advocated for, especially in this like southern arc of the Amazon that's experienced the greatest extent of deforestation. But the main thing is that like the water that generates, there are actually multiple different cycles from, storms that start in the western Amazon basin, and then that water cycles eastward across the basin towards the east. And so if that collapses, it's much bigger of an issue than just restoration alone.
We're here to celebrate the Rainforest XPRIZE and the project finalists. And the prize is technology-based. In what ways does technology belong in the rainforest?
That's a great question. Technology is a tool. And I think the main aspect behind the prize has been accelerating tools that can be used at our disposal, at the disposal of practitioners on the ground, park managers, indigenous communities, anybody who has a stake in monitoring, managing, and protecting the rainforest. So the prize was really designed on enhancing those technologies and tools with a focus on the bottlenecks of data collection and analysis speed. My background and a lot of field biologists around the world, the methods that we've used to study biodiversity haven't changed in a very long time. There are approaches that we use that are still very similar to that of Darwin, a couple centuries ago. And while that's great, that aspect of the urgency of the world that we live in today, we are out of time. We need faster, more efficient tools at our disposal to monitor, manage, and protect the rainforest. And so that's really why XPRIZE Rainforest was designed and launched, to accelerate remote and autonomous systems that anybody could use to monitor over much larger areas, the size of entire national parks, indigenous territories, states, or even countries.
What are the upsides of crowdsourcing?
Data or crowdsourcing?
I guess XPRIZE is through multiple challenges. It's not just rainforest, but what are some of the upsides to crowdsourcing it and making a competition out of it?
Totally. In that sense, we crowdsource solutions from the entire world. We develop and design prizes to launch that we want the world to solve. And in many cases, the ways in which we architect XPRIZE competitions, not everything should be a prize, but there are specific criteria that we look for where maybe the industry or governments or academia are not going to solve this either alone or at the pace that's necessary. But with the right incentive, you can catalyze people to develop those solutions. In the case of Rainforest XPRIZE, it was also, there are a lot of different technologies in other industries that this has incentivized teams to adopt and adapt for the rainforest. And so the ability to put out a global call, on this prize, we had 300 teams from 70 countries that entered this competition. Across 30 years of XPRIZE, we've launched 30 competitions, and that's involved 35,000 competitors from over 170 countries. And so it is crowdsourcing in terms of, seeking the best minds around the world from any industry and sector. Basically, if you have an idea and you put the work behind it to test and prove that it works, you can win an XPRIZE.
Competition versus collaboration.
I've actually learned to view them hand in hand. So I've seen the way that competitions have fostered collaboration. And in fact, there are future prizes that we want to launch that people have actually come up to me and said, we think we need a competition so we stop competing within our own field, within our own sector. And it's an interesting concept. What I have seen in this prize is people working together from across indigenous communities to local and federal governments, across academia, private sector. It's really spurred a lot of collaboration that was necessary in this field. So when we started it, there were a lot of teams that entered with a similar biological background as myself, like in tropical ecology, but maybe didn't have the engineering or the AI or machine learning expertise or, the expertise with drones. And then we had other teams with the opposite. They came in and they were phenomenal drone engineers, but they were like, we've never been to a rainforest before. Or you have indigenous communities who have, traditional knowledge and wisdom of the biodiversity that exists. And it's how do you bring all of this together? And that's really a lot of what the prize did, was matchmaking and forming these super teams, these collaborations that didn't exist previously. And that, I would say, is one of the greatest innovations and breakthroughs of XPRIZE Rainforest.
There are 4 finalists today?
6.
6 finalists. What are a couple of your favorites?
Oh, man.
They all could be. Just maybe take me through them.
I'll try to be as diplomatic as possible. No, just kidding. To be honest, they all are very cool because every single team they all had the same challenge. They all had to accomplish the same task, but they went about it in different ways. One of the coolest things is that the prize as a whole expedited and accelerated the entire field of environmental DNA. So in recent years, there have been a lot of advancements of how you can sequence DNA from water or soil, similar to how, our skin sheds everywhere we go and you leave behind those traces. Well, animals are doing that in the forest as well. And now we have that ability to actually sequence water and soil. Even teams are swabbing trees. And so anything that's encountered those environments, you can tell what's been there almost in like a forensics type of way. And it's crazy because when I first started my career, well, that wasn't even close to being possible. But we were also only like, you would take a tissue sample and maybe sequence one gene out of one specimen. We now have a team that in 24 hours recorded 27 million DNA reads collectively across 6 teams. So 6 days of testing, it's cumulatively 80 million records of DNA that the teams captured.
Wow.
And that is an exponential breakthrough.
And that turns into like data that can be used.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's actually a fascinating way to get an array of, presence data for what exists in that environment. For example, when we were actually scouting the finals location, we put out a lot of traditional recording devices. So we put out camera traps and audio recorders because we wanted to just have a baseline understanding of what's in that forest. And so we actually got some really good data of what existed there, some really neat camera trap photos of panthers or pumas. And then one of our first teams to test within a day had multiple records of different individuals of jaguars, which we were not able to confirm from any of the historical traditional approaches to this. And so that in itself was amazing because you're able to detect these super important species that exist in that landscape so rapidly and without even seeing them, which was pretty remarkable. And then in other ways, we had teams really come up with innovative bioacoustics. We had a team that they had a neat sponsorship where they were working on advancing noise canceling and working with very directional microphones, flying over the canopy, noise canceling out the sound of the drones and running autonomous transects over the entire forest pretty much 24 hours and entirely through the night during periods of like dawn and dusk chorus. And they were able to then identify those species by referencing that with various bioacoustics libraries and things like that. And then there's a lot of fascinating hyperspectral and LiDAR applications. We had one team use a really neat machine learning algorithm to do scans of the entire forest canopy. And then they were able to delineate every single tree crown at canopy height. And they could tell us and show us that there were 22,000 distinct tree crowns in that forest. There could be other species in the understory, but to be able to say, here are the 22,000 individuals at this perspective, and basically identifying groups of species by comparing and contrasting similarities to one another. Those types of things, have not been possible. And so really the way that we had the teams judged was on overall insights. Don't just give us a list of species, but tell us what it means about the forest. Why is this important? Because that's another aspect that has been so difficult in a communication sense, is communicating to people what is the value of biodiversity, or why is the forest important to be kept standing? I think we all live in such bubbles where obviously amongst ourselves, we know that importance, but we've done relatively a poor job, I think, maybe as biologists or conservationists, of communicating this to other audiences. And I think that's where we really wanted the teams to convey, here's what we detected and analyzed in 24 hours, but here's why the world should care. Here is the information that in real time we can provide to managers and practitioners on the ground to actually act on these data.
I was reading about one of the projects, and it mentioned that the canopy was the least accessible point to get data from, and they're using imaging and AI technology to just name the species all at once. That's very cool.
It's awesome. So that team has a solution, and a lot of my background was actually working in the canopy, and so climbing trees to study like orchids in the canopy and things like that. But that's very physically demanding and it takes a long time. You're rigging tree. You can spend an entire day just with one tree. And so if you imagine being able to pick up one of these canopy rafts and fly it anywhere in the forest that you want, drop it off. Teams were doing that. And I think one of the teams deployed something like that in the first 15 minutes. And I was sitting there realizing like my whole back, like this is putting myself out of business from what I used to do, which is awesome. But also thinking of realizing how much of a breakthrough that is. And then I've actually done some of those crazy things of hauling light traps into the canopy as an entomologist and trying to lure insects in and then you're hand collecting them and trying to bring them down. This team basically flew a light trap out, put a camera with a live feed on it, was using AI machine learning to identify species, running it off the cloud. And that is wild. And to be honest, I mean, that type of breakthrough and the way that team developed a holistic package and solution, there is a great market case scenario for a product like that. And that's, I mean, so many of those different reasons around that, as well as that is the team that identified 27 million DNA reads in 24 hours and were able to identify those 22,000 trees combined with the AI machine learning off the cloud in the canopy at night. It's wild. And that is why that team is winning the prize.
Who's resisting you?
That's a broad question. What do you mean?
I don't know. I think in any social movement or type of activism, there's some sort of resistance.
For sure. So, man, where to begin? The prize was launched in 2019 in Brazil by Alana Foundation, our sponsor, which is a Brazilian foundation. At the time in 2019, destruction of the Brazilian Amazon was at an all-time high. There was really an onslaught against activists, against conservationists, anybody working to protect the environment. And that was really motivation to launch the prize in a way that accelerates solutions for the protection of the environment. The reason I start with that is because who's resisting? Worldwide environmental defenders have the highest rate of homicide in the world of any practice. Park rangers, people on the ground working to protect the environment. And that is certainly true, well, throughout the tropics, and it has been true here. And so there has been a lot of resistance, and a lot of that comes from many different directions. There are political challenges in many different places, and that's in large part because of economic incentives from other industries that oftentimes are responsible for the degradation of these ecosystems. So there is a ton of resistance, and I think what has been necessary is to really arm the people on the ground with data to actually be able, and the empowerment of having those tools and being able to map your own parks, to map your own territories, and have those tools to be able to enhance the protection of your own land. And that as well has been a massive challenge with indigenous communities around the world. So, I think the prize has been an exciting way to raise awareness, to accelerate innovation, But a big part of the solutions will go on to help empower people on the ground in terms of protecting their territories, protecting their land rights, establishing and demarcating new territories. When you ask that question, that's where my mind goes of like the whole environmental movement and the history of it has always faced a ton of resistance. One thing that I think the prize and the solutions that come out of it could really help crack the code on is if we can better understand in this way the value of nature, the value of the environment, and we can convince people to invest in the future of it, then we can maybe flip the scales on investing in the protection of these environments, understanding that it's in our best interest to invest long-term in those approaches rather than short-term in the extraction of these places. And if we can flip that, then there's actually, a lot of times you have to hit people in the wallet of an economic case for these types of things. But if we can show and convince people that it's in the world's not only safety, security, food systems, all of these areas, but it's an economic case to invest in the future of the planet by investing in generations to come and not just here and now.
In that resistance, are they 100% wrong?
It depends at what level. And the reason I'll answer in that way is because a lot of things that take place on the ground, if it's local stakeholders, if it's individuals, harvesting timber or wildlife products or things like that for their own personal gain to support their families, that's one thing. There's a higher level of, what commercial industries incentivize that. I don't, if I were in that situation, the way that it transformed my mindset is if I was in that situation on the ground, I would do the same for my family because you have to. If there are overall better alternatives, better incentives, then absolutely we can shift the tide. I do think it's wrong when we project that the solution is all on the consumers, rather than, I think with different corporations and governments, we can change these systems. It shouldn't have to be, if 8 billion people all did the right thing. There are a lot of perverse incentives that drive all of this. And so kind of a complex and loaded question, but I appreciate it because these are the complex things that we need to figure out.
Under all this urgency and tipping points, how far should activism go?
Activism plays a very important role to help hold people accountable, to raise awareness. I think that's a big thing where awareness can always be useful in this context. And through raising awareness, it also helps people not be able to hide behind, these different bad practices. So yeah, I think activism plays a huge role in all of this. There are different forms of activism. I think some are more effective than others. But overall, I understand where people are coming from as to being enraged. There is an urgency in the world and people's lives are at stake and the future of our planet and humanity is at stake. And so, to be honest, it's almost that, the activism comes from a place of people screaming out of how can you not see what's happening? And at the same time, there is a question as to people have been screaming out since, the 60s and 70s about all of these environmental movements. So I think it plays an important role. I think that it has always had to adapt and evolve to find different effective ways to reach people in places of power or decision-making authority. And interestingly, one thing that I've seen through the prize is not only has it brought people together, it's fostered collaboration, but it's had the ability to transcend, administrations, transcend states or countries, international boundaries, different sectors. Here in Brazil, bringing people together across different administrations, across different states and the federal government and indigenous communities, all around one common mission and goal. That in itself, I think, is a different kind of activism and raising awareness and unity. And so I think there's a lot of power in that ability to really raise awareness, but about something positive. People need something to be hopeful about.
As a future ancestor, what message would you leave for future generations regarding the rainforest?
I won't repeat the first thing that came to mind there. Don't mess it up. As a future ancestor, I mean, we have a lot to learn from our ancestors. And I think that is what we're missing here, is we're only focused on our current generation here and now. And as a future ancestor, we need to learn from the past and we need to think about the future. And so, there are many different cultures that view existence within 7 generations, the one you're living in and the 3 before you and the 3 after. And we need to think about it in terms of recognizing the lessons learned and the knowledge and the wisdom of those who came before us, and invest in the future generations, because there is so much more that can and should come after us. So I think it's, humbling yourself. It's not all about us. And there are also, many other species on this planet as well. So understanding that we are a part of nature and this is our home planet and it's the only one that we naturally live on. And so, we need to cherish that and protect it.
What conversations aren't being had?
I would say, something that I feel is a reality is I am very skeptical about where our species will be at the end of this century if we don't get these next couple of years right. We go to a lot of different, right now the climate COP 29 is currently going on. We just had the biodiversity COP in Colombia a couple of weeks ago. And there is progress being made in different areas. There definitely is. I think that outside of those realms, there is not like an existential understanding that we don't have a choice. We are living in the world right now that at the end of last century was predicted and being shouted about of, famines, fires, floods, increased intensity of hurricanes and typhoons and all of that. We're living that now. And so I think the place that we're at currently, we can't afford to continue on this trajectory. And I have really serious concerns about what humanity looks like. It's 2024. Yeah. 2100 seems like a terrifying place. And I won't be around. But again, it's thinking about those future generations. Like I wouldn't want future generations to have to live in that type of world. And what we do in these next couple of years dictates what that will look like. So going back to tipping points, I think there are so many tipping points that we are at the cusp of right now. And I truly believe that we have the intelligence and ingenuity that got us in this situation. If we apply it in a different way, I think we can rein certain things back and course correct. And it will take a ton of effort and it will take a lot of time. But I think it's possible to stave off the worst of what it can be. I don't think I live in such a bubble where this is all I deal with day in and day out every single day. But in terms of the conversations that are not being had, I don't think the average person, in whatever corporations or everyday life really views that in such an existential way. And I think it's kind of time to have that realization that we're on a trajectory to drive our species to extinction, along with another million species or so on the planet. In general, over time, the Earth will recover. A lot of species will no longer exist, but the Earth will end up being fine without us in the long term if that ends up being the route that we take.
What brings you hope?
Every single person here, to me, everything that I just said, I think is motivation for what we do, especially at XPRIZE. It is easy, and I think before I joined XPRIZE almost 5 years ago, being very much in the conservation world, it can be very doom and gloom and very negative often. And it will be very difficult to have even just like minor wins and victories. You certainly have to celebrate those. I think that our XPRIZE Rainforest community understands the reality of what I just described and are actively choosing to do something each and every day to drive solutions. And we recognize that we're not going to solve every single thing in the world. We're focused on specific things. And by being very directional and very specific with what we're focusing on. This whole ecosystem over the past 5 years has been waking up every day and saying, we're working on driving solutions to this. And we've had different milestones along the way that, we celebrate those victories. And that to me has given me so much hope and inspiration, because these solutions that teams have driven have been amazing. But then also the community, the way that entire countries have come together around this, and indigenous leaders and, everybody that is working at the forefront of this field has become part of this movement that is focused on optimism, hope, and positivity.
This is the Hatch Podcast. Thanks so much, Peter, for being here.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Maybe it's all about where you look. Our current social landscape is rife with outlets, credible and otherwise, for every form of information. News stations, social media platforms, print and digital publications, radio and television all offer a peek into the pot. The swirling cauldron of verifiable facts and blatant misinformation, abject disassociation and twinkly-eyed optimism. It's all there, and there's no impartial, equitable filter that isn't its own contrivance. So we look where we're directed. Algorithms slow the flow of the gushing river to a palatable trickle, while news agencies cater to niche political perspectives, and the masses tune in. The good news, in a world that seems intent on devolving into the bleakest of outcomes, is that it's all a matter of perspective. And nothing inspires novel perspective like a new frontier. In a metaphor as eloquent as it is obvious, the exploration of the rainforest, to truly understand and assimilate the value of the secrets it holds, is a selfsame uncovering of the detritus we must engage in to find the life springing forth from the death all around us. In redirecting our gaze from the forest floor to its canopy, we see all that has been hidden from our vision. When diverse people gather to define that novel vision, as XPRIZE and the like encourage, they embrace the analog within advancement, developing interpersonal intimacy and collaborating across specialized silos to innovate in communion, igniting the home fires of hope, shedding light on possibility, and redirecting the gaze to a path forward and through. It is, in simple essence, all in where you look. Stay tuned for the second installment of this special 2-part Rio G20 series for my interview with XPRIZE Rainforest winner Team Limelight, as we peer into a never-before-seen world kissed by the clouds.
It seems now more than ever that we have found ourselves on the cusp of monumental worldwide change. Whether we consider the environment, politics, infrastructure, health, economics, or inequities across a broad swath of social constructs, the consensus is clear and urgent. All is not as it should be. The United Nations, a consortium of 193 member states from around the globe, agrees. In 2015, the UN unanimously adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. These goals call for urgent action and global partnership to secure peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future.
In alignment with the SDGs, Hatch, a curated network of artists, activists, and entrepreneurs working together to accelerate positive global change, has partnered with I Am Interchange to fuse adventure journalism with experiential design labs to develop innovative solutions to complex global challenges. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoy it, please subscribe or leave us a rating. This episode was produced by Yara Craner, Susan Karstensen, and me, Tate Chamberlain. A shout out to our media and production team, Jessica Byerly, Darko Sevilla, Jacob Desch, Sean Mackinson, Amin Yarsu, and Zane Giordano. A special thanks to Atosa Sultani and Kennedy Smith. With so much gratitude to the Hatch supporters, Steelcase, the Kauffman Foundation, the Gwydion Fund, Envision Equality, the Hatch Volunteers, Board of Directors, Hatch Guardians, and the community who help make this work and mission possible. To learn more about Hatch, visit hatchexperience.org. Building community could not happen without food. And with that, I'd like to thank Whistle Pig Korean, Red Tractor Pizza, and Zocalo Coffee House. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? shoot me an email at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.